All right.
Oh, Joshua 1:8. Okay, I am familiar with that verse.
Told you. You get an easy one. Yeah. So we're moving on to the book of Joshua, and we'll be doing Judges and Ruth, and probably have a few weeks of break, so I need time to set up. As I was telling Sue earlier, I got to get my chronology and timeline and dates of history in line, or John will correct me every time I'm wrong. So he knows, he watches those things. So, but when you get into all the kings, you got to have a little bit of a chronology and understanding of the kingdom. So it takes a few weeks to set up for me. So we will be getting into it, and Alan will be taking, I think, Chronicles. So he's going to teach Chronicles. But we're into Joshua now. We're leaving the Pentateuch behind, and so let me open in prayer, and we'll get right into that. Father, we thank you for this time. I just pray for the people traveling, probably still on the road, Lord, for safety in the cold weather. And just give thanks for the time and warm building. Thank you. Amen. All right, so Joshua, very closely connected to the Pentateuch, because Joshua transitions the leadership from Moses, and that's how the book of Joshua starts out, right, in a transition phase. And so Joshua is the leader who takes the people in the land. They're on the doorstep of the land, and you really get no time passing from the end of Deuteronomy, where Moses is looking out at the land, and he dies, and he's buried, and then God is speaking to Joshua. And so Joshua very closely connected to the first 5 books, the Pentateuch written by Moses. And memory verse is very much thematic of the book, right? The book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all that is written in it. And for then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Remember, Deuteronomy ends with the blessings and the cursings, right? The 2 paths are laid out before you, and you have to choose. And so Joshua, the theme in the early Joshua very much is, now we're going in, you need to choose, right? As he'll say, choose for you this day whom you will serve, right? And so Joshua 1:8 will be our memory verse. The outline is pretty simple. It's broken into 2 halves. You have the actual conquest, the battles that take place as they go into the land and conquer the land. And then you have the second part of it, which really the discussion is about how they divide up and settle the land. And so you have a lot of details at the end of the book that are concerning how they settle the land, which tribes go where and why, right? And so those are the 2 main divisions in the book. And yet the first part of the conquest, you have the preparation, right? The first 5 chapters kind of get into the preparation time, the mindset and teaching and instruction, and even lessons in Jericho and Ai about how it's going to go as they settle the land. There's an easy path and there's a hard path, right? Jericho's the easy path. Ai is the hard path. And so you have that kind of instruction and preparation, and then a lot of details about the battles that take place, which are very divinely orchestrated. And so the book takes place over about 25 years or so that they've are conquering the land. Joshua becomes an old man as you get toward the settling in the land. The battles are being completed, and he says, when I started this thing, I was a young guy, a spy going in the land at 40 years old. Now I'm ancient, And so that's the basic makeup and division of the book. It all takes place either east of the Jordan River or west of the Jordan River, as that's how the battles and the tribes are kind of divided up. And so we'll look at the first part of book of Joshua, the preparation going in. So it starts out right away in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "It came about after the death of Moses, the servant of Yahweh, that Yahweh spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant or attendant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. So now arise and cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving you, them to the sons of Israel. In every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses." And so you have, from the Lebanon to as far as the river Euphrates and the Hittites, land of the Hittites and the Great Sea, and the settling, toward the setting of the sun will be your territory. They give some basic boundaries there in verse 4 of the land which God has allotted to them. Verse 5, it says, "No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life, just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you." So, and then verse 6 is kind of your thematic, and that ends with our memory verse, right? "Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, to be careful to do all according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you to do. Do not turn aside from it, to the right or to the left, so that you may be prosperous wherever you go. And this book of the law will not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all that is according be careful to do all that is according. I'm going to lose my place there. That is all that is written in, according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and you will have success." So that's the main theme of the book of Joshua, right there in the first 8 verses. And verse 9, again, the third time he says, "Have I not commanded you? So be strong and courageous." Right? Do not be in dread or be dismayed, because Yahweh your God is going to go with you wherever you go. And so that sets the stage for the whole book, right there in the first, verses in the chapter. And that it's a transition from Moses to Joshua, but it's the transition is this: just as Yahweh was with Moses, so He's going to be with Joshua. And He's going to set Joshua up as a leader in the same fashion that He established Moses. And so there'll be some parallels, and symbolically, even as they cross the Jordan and He parts the waters, and He kind of sets it up in the same way and saying that I'm just as much with Joshua here, and I'm going to go before you, right? So that's how the book of Joshua starts. And you get into this preparation to go into the land by understanding God's divine choosing of Joshua. And Joshua has some, thoughts and preparation that take place with that. But verse 13 is it says, remember, then the part of it is he's speaking to the tribes, and they're on the east side of the Jordan River, and they're talking about getting ready to cross over. Remember the word which Moses, the servant of Yahweh, commanded you, saying, Yahweh your God gives you rest and will give you this land. Right? So he's talking to the 3.5 tribes who are on the east side of the Jordan River. They've essentially already conquered. And he's encouraging them to go and fight with their other brothers and the other tribes and cross the Jordan River with them to give them success. But leave your women and children behind in the land that you've already got. Right? You already got your part. You can let your women and children settle and remain in the land. And then in verse 15, until Yahweh gives your brothers rest as He has given to you, right? As they also possess the land which He's giving them, then you shall return to the land of your possessions and possess it, right? So they've kind of conquered, but now they got to go and help fight for the rest of it, so that all the tribes are working together. Part of it is, later in the history of the nation of Israel, there's always this difficulty between those tribes who are on the east side of the Jordan versus those tribes who are on the west. They don't always want to work together. They don't always want to help each other. They get kind of lazy about it and get an attitude at times. But here is the initial establishing. Joshua is saying, you got to go, man. This is the way God wants it done, and you're going to go and you're going to fight. So with that, they agree in verse 17, right, and make their bold statements of, just as we have listened to Moses and all the things, so we will listen to you. Only may Yahweh your God be with you as he was with Moses. Right? And so they have this commandment in verse 18, if whoever rebels against this is going to be put to death. So we're going. We're going. So as you get into chapter 2, the first battle that takes place is in Jericho. They send spies out to Jericho, and that takes place in chapter 2 and verse 1. Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly, and they go and spy it out. And when they went into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab, and lodged there, and was told to the king of Jericho, saying, behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search over the land. So they know what's going on, they know what it's about, and they're going to go look for them, right? So that's part of the whole illustration is that, they go into Rahab's house and lodge there, and then her speech is something pretty amazing. She says, I'm in the middle of the page here. She goes, I know that Yahweh has given you the land, and that terror of you has fallen on us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you, because we have heard how Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, and you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who are on the other side of the Jordan, both Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. Indeed, we have heard it, and our hearts melted, and a courageous spirit no longer rose up in any man because of you. For Yahweh, your God, He is God in heaven, above and on earth. And so this is the report that's gone out in front of the nation of Israel. Before they've even shown up, she's saying, look, it's everywhere. Everybody knows. Everybody knows you're coming. And we've heard about how you left Egypt and what happened there, and we've heard about how you defeated the kings east of the Jordan and what happened there, and nobody wants to fight you guys. Right? Nobody wants to go that way. But again, it's important, I think, that they're understanding and they're hearing the name Yahweh. They're hearing that Yahweh goes before you. And this is why we're so afraid. We know He's the one who made heaven and earth. This is the pagan nations who are out there are hearing about this Creator God who made everything, and they're knowing His name, and they're seeing His mighty acts. And so the glory of the Lord is going before them and fighting before they even show up. So you have what takes place there, and I think that speech is really essential to understanding the whole thing, that Rahab knows, right? She understands and believes in the God of Israel, and so she knows exactly what's happening. And so they make a pledge with her, right, to save her family if they tie the scarlet cord in the window. Anybody that's in the house, will be preserved for their help and understanding. And you can see that she's ready to believe in the God of Israel, So she does, and she helps them escape. And, as they're getting ready for the battle, that takes place in Joshua chapter 3, they cross the Jordan. So they get ready to go, and they're going to get ready to fight this battle as they cross the Jordan. And so in Joshua chapter 3, they arise out early to go and cross. And at the end of 3 days, it says, but it happened at the end of 3 days, the officers went through the midst of the camp in chapter 3, verse 2. They commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your God with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall go out from your place and go after it. However, there shall be a distance, about 2,000 cubits. Do not come near to it, that you may know by which way you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. So they have this positioning as they're going to travel that the only way you know where to go is you're going to follow the ark. Let it go far enough ahead that you know which way to go. Otherwise, you'll end up going the wrong way because you don't know where you're going. And so they carry the ark and they set it. And in verse 5, Joshua said to the people, set yourselves apart as holy, for tomorrow Yahweh will do wondrous deeds among you. Right? So this whole battle of Jericho is unconventional, obviously, in the way that it's fought and the way that it goes, because God is going to show His wonders among them. And that's the point, right? That's the whole point. God says, you're not really going to fight this battle. You're really just going to clean it up. And you're going to see something that, it can go like this for you if you're obedient to God, right? So, in verse 7, this is what a part of the whole battle, too, is this. In verse 7, Yahweh said to Joshua, this day is when I will begin to magnify you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. And so that's, again, this transition, and God says the Battle of Jericho is a starting point where the way it's going to go, the wonders and miracles, they're going to know that I'm with you. And you're going to be elevated, Joshua. So as they make this crossing, and they kind of have a memorial about crossing, the Jordan in chapter 4. And they want to, as it says, take up 12 stones from here out in the middle of the Jordan. As they're crossing, it becomes dry land, right? And it says from like the boundary of one city to another border, the whole Jordan River is blocked up, and it's kind of stacking itself up into the sky. And they're going to set up a memorial for this crossing. And it says, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over. And they're going to build a little memorial to remember that this crossing, and a part of it is, I think symbolically, this is the whole thing. Just as Moses took them out of Egypt by crossing dry land where the river crossing, the sea, so they have this Jordan crossing that kind of sets up Joshua as God's man, right? There's a miraculous sign that accompanies their crossing into the land that sets up for Joshua. So by the time you get to chapter 5, and they're moving along, they kind of have to make their way to Jericho. They have the memorial to teach their children about how they crossed into the land. And in chapter 5, you get into this whole, they set themselves apart, circumcise everyone. That's a part of their devotion to the Lord, right? Outward sign for them. But in chapter 5, verse 10, it makes this point. The sons of Israel camped at Gilgal and celebrated the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month of the desert plains of Jericho. Just so you know that God has a calendar. He knows exactly where He's at. He knows how long it takes Him to get to Jericho. And He knows they're going to stop and they're going to celebrate the Passover because that's by God's design. God planned the calendar. So they're there a year, they're there at the yearly point where the time is to celebrate the Passover, and so they do. And so a part of it is, it says, like in as they're celebrating this Passover, the significance of it is, verse 11, on that day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the yield of the land, both unleavened cakes and roasted grain. So the moment they're able to eat from the produce of the land that they're supposed to own, God stops the manna. It shuts off. And says the manna ceased on that day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna. But they were able to eat some of the produce of the land of Canaan during that year. So the crossing and coming up to Jericho and the Passover that's celebrated is memorialized. That was the last of the manna. God provided for you in the wilderness. Now you're in the land. You're going to eat from the land now. And so a different provision for them. Verse 13, a very important theological passage there. It says, it happened that when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him, with his sword drawn in his hand. Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And the man replied and said, no, rather, I indeed now come as commander of the host of Yahweh. So Joshua fell on his face to the earth, with his face to the earth, and bowed down to him and said, what has my Lord to say to his slave? And the commander of the host of Yahweh said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now, if you understand what takes place there, no angel ever receives worship, and so this commander of the Lord of hosts cannot be an angel. You're likely looking at a pre-incarnate Christ coming to lead this battle in victory as a man coming down to fight this battle who can receive worship. And so I look at the captain of the Lord of hosts as a Christophany in the Old Testament, that this is Christ coming to lead Israel in the battle. So, verses 13 through 15 really mark that out, the fact that he would bow low and he was told to remove his sandals, just like when Moses met the burning bush. This is God coming in his presence, and as a figure of a man, I look at this as Christ. And the New Testament says Christ led Israel, so that's what I look at it as. So when you get into the battle that takes place, and then you go into chapter 6, they get to Jericho. Jericho was tightly shut because the sons of Israel, no one went out, no one came in. So they have kind of a siege going out. When a town is attacked, they have city walls, and they have usually one main gate, and they can close it and bar it shut as a form of protection. And a lot of the ancient cities in this place had, the very similar setup. It was the normal setup. So Yahweh says in verse 2, "Look, I see how I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and the valiant warriors. So you shall march around the city, all the men circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days." So you have this whole prescription that's going to be set up in Joshua chapter 6, right? But on the 7th day, that's going to be 7 priests shall carry 7 rams of trumpets before the ark, and on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpet, and it will be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down beneath itself, and the people will go up, every man straight ahead. So you'll just be able to walk into the city. So they have this whole plan to do exactly what the Lord says, right? And they're going to follow it about. And it says in verse 16, "At the 7th time when the priest blew the trumpet, Joshua said to the people, 'Shout, for the Lord has given it into your hands and given you the city.'" But in verse 17, this is where we get the idea, right, that it comes up, this phrase, "But the city shall be under the ban." That is devoted to God. It's God's city, not yours. You don't take anything from it, right? Anything that comes out of here, God gets, or you destroy it. Nobody gets to keep anything. And the first battles, as they're going into the land, God says, "No, these first battles are mine. You don't get nothing out of them," right? That sets up confrontation. Yeah.
So, just reading the number 7, is that significant? Or,
Only in the sense that I think God does things in 7s, but I think that matches the pattern that God establishes, where 7 is a significant number for Him. Okay? Nothing magical or mystical in our sense, but when God uses it, yeah. 7 days of creation, 7 times in the battle, 7s all throughout Revelation. You get that a lot, right? So God has that pattern established right from creation, that's a significant number for Him. But He does. So He sets it up. "The city shall be under the ban, and all that belongs in it. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her, right, can be, and her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent." Right? "But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things but devoted to destruction, lest as you are devoting them to destruction, you take some of the things devoted to destruction and make the camp of Israel devoted to destruction." So you want to take the things that are supposed to be destroyed, God's going to destroy you, because you'll become devoted to destruction. And that's how He warns them. And so as they go into the battle, that's a part of what takes place in Joshua chapter 7, right? Nope, they acted unfaithfully. Some of the sons of Israel acted unfaithful in regard to the things devoted to destruction. And it was Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, and he's the one who did it from the tribe of Judah. He took some of the things. So they go out, and they want to go and fight the battle. And they said, well, it's a small place. We only need about 3,000 men. We don't need everybody. Let's go take care of this piece of cake. Only they get sent running, right? And they lose about 36 men, if I think right, or 6 men somewhere. They lose a small number of people as they're being chased from the gates. Like it just doesn't go well at all, right? And that's where in verse 11, and says, Israel has sinned, and they have also trespassed against my covenant which I commanded them. They have even taken some of the things devoted to destruction, right? So rise up, in verse 13, set the people apart as holy, and say to them, set yourselves apart as holy for tomorrow. For thus Yahweh, the God of Israel, has said, there are things devoted to destruction in your midst, O Israel. You cannot rise up before your enemies until you have removed the things devoted to destruction from your midst. And so they have this pattern of going up one by the tribes and looking for the things devoted to destruction until they get to Achan, right? And in verse 19, as they find out where he's from, the tribe of Judah, and this is a part of it. He says, my son, I implore you, give glory to Yahweh, the God of Israel, and give praise to him, and declare to me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me. Right? So he has to confess. He has to confess his sin. And then he has to bear the consequences of it. Right? So in verse 20, he says, truly I have sinned against Yahweh, and I took the things devoted to destruction. And he gives the description of them there. And so they have to stone him, and they put him to death to cleanse the nation of Israel from these things devoted to destruction. Because God said, whoever takes it will be devoted to destruction. And so, in order to get right with God and to reestablish, in a sense, the blessing part of the covenant, they have to clear it out from their midst, clear the sinfulness out from their midst, and it's capital punishment. So then they're able to go up again against Ai in chapter 8. This begins the battles of Joshua kind of in earnest now, how they're going to go about taking the land. And so the city of Ai is a very big city. It's a very big deal. And they go up and, they go up and they easily take it, right? He says, see, I have given the king of Ai and the Ai and the king of Ai into your hand. You shall do to Ai its king just as you did to Jericho. You shall take only its spoil and its cattle and plunder for yourselves. See, where Jericho they took nothing, here at Ai they can take the plunder for themselves. Just no man, woman, and child. These are people who are in the punishment of disobedience to God, and so they are to be punished that way, to destruction. So they're going to ambush the city. And, they go into Ai, they're able to attack Ai and have this victory, and they build an altar in remembrance of it. And so they learn a lesson here. And this whole lesson kind of takes place. It says, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, at Mount Ebal. They stop after this battle. And just as Moses, the servant of Yahweh, had commanded in verse 31, as it was written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar was built of uncut stones, on which no man had wielded an iron tool. They offered burnt offerings on it to Yahweh and sacrificed offerings. And he wrote there on the stones the copy of the law of Moses, likely the 10 Commandments, which he had written in the presence of the sons of Israel. This is a re-commemorating of their victory, that this is what brings victory, obedience to the commandments. And all Israel with their elders and their officers and their judges were standing on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, the sojourner as well as the native. And half of them stood in front of Mount Gerizim and half of them on Mount Ebal. Does that sound familiar? Remember the first commemorating? There's the blessings and the cursings, right? He's going to remind them now that they're in the land, he's doing the same. And so he points them in the direction of the mountains. And then it says this, verse 34. Afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that was in it, written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the sojourners who were among them. So they had a lesson about victory at Jericho, and they had a lesson about discipline at Ai. And so Joshua, wisely, he stops, says, we don't need to go any further until we remember, let's go over this for the 100th time, the blessings and the cursings. Let's make sure we're clear, right? We're going to go beyond this, and we want to know that we're walking, obediently, and we remember every word. There was not a word that was left out of the law. So that sets the first two battles, kind of set the tone for their conquest of the land. Chapter 9, you get into the issue of the Gibeonites, who were kind of crafty, kind of smart, kind of shrewd. And it says it happened when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan and in the hill country and in the Shephelah, which is, again, kind of a rolling plain land, and on all the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, they heard about it. And they gathered themselves together with one accord to fight with Joshua and with Israel. So everybody's hearing about the battles, and we're talking about this is modern day Gaza and Lebanon and the coastlands, and the Shephelah are kind of headed toward Jerusalem. That's a rolling hill country that gets a little more hilly as you get downright, mountainous as you get into Jerusalem. But you're talking about from west up to Jerusalem from the sea. It says all these kings hear about it. They said, well, we're never going to win alone. We're never going to battle this one-on-one. We need to all get together and fight Israel if we're going to stop this. So all the kings there, these 5 nations, areas, they get together and they said, we got a plan. We need to get together with one accord. But, in verse 3, the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done before Jericho and to Ai. They had a different plan, so they acted craftily in verse 4, and they went and traveled as envoys and took worn-out sacks on their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, worn out and patched sandals on their feet and clothes, and bread that was all dry and crumbly. They're taking croutons with them to eat. And they went to Joshua in the camp, and they said, we've come from a far-off place, right? And they said, well, how do we know that's true? And they show them all the clothes, they show them all the bread, and they say, oh, God did say we could make a covenant with somebody who's far off, right? And we can do that. So they do it. And they did not ask counsel from the Lord. Part of it is, even then, they probably should have prayed and asked the Lord. You did say we could do this, but we should probably still ask. We're not very good at this yet. So, they agree to this covenant without asking the Lord. So it comes about that it says, when they're confronted with it and they confront the Gibeonites, they said, yep, we just did not want to get destroyed. So we did what we had to do. We knew that if we went up against battle with you, we're done, we're lost. We'd rather be slaves than dead, so we did what we had to do. Joshua says, well, then you will be slaves, like you said, right? And he says, you will be servants of the nation of Israel, carrying wood, carrying water, doing whatever we need to this day. And they were always slaves. They always were. And so chapter 9, that's kind of the Gibeonites. They get that portion of it where they're able to make that covenant, and the covenant with peace covenant with Israel stands. God doesn't get in the way. They just kind of become a nuisance to Israel. And a part of it is, now that you've taken on this peace treaty, it's going to have implications. Okay? You don't get off scot-free. God doesn't kill them or, judge them with any fireballs or anything. But there's kind of a consequential, because you made this choice, you're going to have to stand up and defend these people you made a treaty with, because now the 5 kings say, you know what, we got to take care of the Gibeonites before we ever take care of Israel. They made a treaty with Israel. Let's go out and wipe them out. So now Israel is obligated to go and defend them. And so that's a part of the consequences for it, right? We have sworn to them in verse 19 of chapter 9, right? We've sworn to them by Yahweh, the God of Israel, so we cannot touch them. And we will actually ultimately have to defend them. And that's what takes place in chapter 10. So when you get into chapter 10, verse 1 says, it happened that when Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted it to destruction, just as it had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made a peace with Israel and were within their land, they feared exceedingly, because Gibeon was a great city. Gibeonites were not stupid. They were nice and large and strong, and if they fought with Israel, they would probably be very difficult to defeat anybody in the whole land, without God's help, right? That'd be a formidable army, Gibeonites and Israel together. So the kings are going, we got to stop this before it ever gets started. Right? They feared exceedingly because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai and its men were mighty. Therefore, Adonai, in verse 3, Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to the other kings of Hebron and Jarmuth and Lachish and Eglon. These are even some of the Philistine cities later on that you'll hear about along the coast in the Gaza area. They're saying, we got to rise up. In verse 4, Come up to me and help me, and let us strike Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and the sons of Israel. So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, they go up. They're going to go out to the Gibeonites. They're going to camp against the Gibeonites and fight against it. Verse 6 says, when the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal, saying, do not abandon your slaves. Come up to us quickly and save us, and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us. So, really what I look at this, and militarily, I think, you always have these back and forths in a battle. The 5 kings, they get together, they think they're going to do the right thing and take Gibeon out. God's just going to use it to wipe them out. He puts them all together in one place and makes it easy. He'd had to fight 5 separate battles, and God says, we can do it all at once. Right? But you will have to go up and defend the Gibeonites. That's your consequence in a sense, right? You're going to stick to your treaty because you made it, and you are going to go up and fight. But it turns out for the better, because they're able to go up and fight. And it says in chapter 10, verse 10, the Lord confounded them, threw them into confusion, and he struck them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and pursued them by the way of ascent at Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. So you have this whole thing that battles happen. Usually in the ancient world, they find a nice plain to go to. One army gathers up on the other side, another army gathers up on the other side, and then you run toward the middle and fight each other. And then when you start to lose, you run away and you say, yeah, you won. And that way not everybody dies. Everybody gets to run away. You usually let them go. Israel didn't fight that way a lot of times because they were devoting these people to destruction. But the normal thing is that's what you would do. So the people started running away, right? We're losing the battle. We're running. And so you pursue them. And so as they're running up, and now they have to go uphill, probably out of the plains, or downhill out of the area where they're fighting, and it says God's just striking them as they go on the way of ascent, going up into the hills. Now it says in verse 11, now it happened as they fled from before Israel, while they were at the descent going down into Beth Horon, that Yahweh threw down large stones from heaven on them, as far as Zedekiah, and they died. And there were more who died from the stones, the hailstones, than from the sons of Israel with the sword. So God confuses them so that they get wiped out, start running away, and as they're going uphill and downhill, God's just throwing rocks at them and killing them along the way, more than the Israelites could kill. So it's a pretty miraculous battle in that sense, that you've got hailstones coming, raining down out of heaven and killing people more than can be killed with the sword. So again, God delivers them from the 5 kings that were there, and God really delivers them out of that. And then verse 12, because of that, Joshua spoke to Yahweh in the day when Yahweh gave over the Amorites before the sons of Israel, and said in the sight of Israel, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon, in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nations avenged themselves on their enemies. So part of it is you have this miraculous, hailstones coming down and wiping the army out along the way, but they're not all dead. And so because they're required by their peace treaty to defend the Gibeonites, they can't stop. They don't want to end it here, or they would have to go and fight another battle. So Joshua asked God to extend the day, make it longer, so we can just finish it here. We don't want to have to find them again somewhere in the hills and fight them a second time. We just want to keep going and finish this thing. So he asked the Lord to extend the sun and the moon and to hold them in the place until the battle was done. And it was so. And so they're able to fight. And it says, was it not written in the book of Jashar, the sun and the moon in the middle of the sky, and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day? You get extended almost a whole day. And it says there was no day like that before and no day after it when Yahweh listened to the voice of a man, for Yahweh fought for Israel. So part of it is this kind of breaks the back militarily of the whole area of Canaan on the western side. That these 5 greatest armies and kings get together and God wipes it all out. So there's a lot of work left to do. But strategically, they don't have much left to fight with when this is done. And God's just kind of made it a lot easier to go in. And they're going to fight for years to clean it up. But there's no great army which is going to be so great before them that it's going to look overwhelming to them after this. It just doesn't exist. God broke the back of all these nations in one day, an extended day, in one battle. Because of their mistake of making a peace treaty with the Gibeonites, God turns it into good. And again, militarily kind of wipes out the hardest part of the battle, mostly by himself. And so that's kind of what you get as you get up to chapter 10. And all of the results that come out after that are really now a cleanup effort. All the battles that they have to fight are going to be not as intense or not as daunting as having to fight these 5 kings. And it goes very well because God set it up and divinely orchestrated that he could destroy the army as Israel just went along and hacking at them with swords. And did a little bit. But God did most of it. Any questions up to this point?
What is the book of Jasher? I
have no idea. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
It's not biblical. It was maybe a book they had written for their history, but there's no copies and not known. So, they must. I mean, there could be multiple people recording their history as they go along. It wouldn't be unusual. It's just not a biblical version or recording of it. How far we want to get here. Yeah, so really the cleanup effort takes place, and in chapter 10, verse 16, it says, these 5 kings fled, and they hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. It was told Joshua that the 5 kings had been found hiding in a cave. I mean, if you ever heard of some of the battles in Afghanistan and the Middle East, they're pretty good at hiding in caves. This is what they do. And it's part of the geography, right, of the land, that these caves exist. And these kings are not stupid, so they're looking for cover. They know they're in trouble. Joshua says, well, I got an idea in verse 18. Let's roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and assign men by it to keep watch over them. And as we do that, we're going to run back and pursue our enemies and finish the job. They're just not going to have their kings to worry about. We'll put them in jail while we go and finish the battle. And so they were able to do that. It came about in verse 20 that when Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a very great slaughter until they were completely destroyed, and even the survivors, those of them who survived, had entered the fortified cities, that all the people returned to the camp of Joshua at Makkedah in peace. And no one so much as lifted his tongue against any of the sons of Israel. So nobody has any fight left in them. Nobody has any wish to confront Israel. So Joshua in verse 22 opens the mouth of the cave and brings the 5 kings out. And he did so, and he brought in verse 23 the 5 kings out from the cave. And he lists the kings there, the king of Jerusalem and Hebron and Jarmuth, Lachish and Eglon. Again, Lachish and Eglon are at least known as Philistine cities. And it happened that when they brought the kings out to Joshua Joshua called for all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, "Come near now and put your feet on the necks of these kings." And so they came near and put their feet on their necks. This is really symbolic. It's a way of just kind of teaching and instructing his commanders and saying, what did God just do for you? He gave you victory here. And the victory is, now you don't have to be afraid of the people of the land like these kings, right? You have, putting your foot on their neck is they're in total submission to you because of what God has done. And so Joshua then, executes them. And so he says in verse 25, "Do not fear or be dismayed, but be strong and courageous. For thus Yahweh will do to all your enemies with whom you fight." And he executes them. And so what happened at sunset in verse 27, that Joshua gave a command and they took them down from the tree. They had hung them, right? So they cover the large stones back over the cave as a memorial, and they captured Macedon that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword and devoted it to destruction, and every person who was in it, so that it left no survivors. Thus he did to the king of Macedon, just as he had done to the king of Jericho. And so you have this battle that's taking place in chapter 10 that's kind of wrapping up, and that's where we'll stop. That really, again, strategically takes out the main military force in the land. And God has given them this big victory that kind of sets the stage for everything that takes place after this. And so we'll pick it up and kind of starting in chapter 11 next week. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for this time. I pray that our understanding even of kind of the military strategy, the decisions that were made, the lessons that were learned from Israel all kind of fit into their place to see that you are a great God. And that you accomplished miraculous signs even throughout the battle, that no one could say anything about how they won the battle except that you did it. They wouldn't say a word. And so, Lord, we just want to learn and understand that you are our sovereign today. You rule over all the nations of the earth, and they will be done according to your will. Help us to trust you in these things, in the events of the nations of the world. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.